Thomas, you want to move? You want to move to the next page?
Oop, too far. There we go.
All right. So this whole conversation, or the reason why we decided to have this talk and the timing of it is because we wanted to just discuss, and we'll do open up for questions and that kind of thing as well. But we wanted to give some information on what does it look like under this new administration when it comes to the census, when it comes to redistricting, and when it comes to civic engagement. So as we shared with you all, SD counts. Those are our three pillars those are the three things that we focus on. And within those three things, we focus on education, public health, and infrastructure. So right now, what I'm going to discuss is based on what the upcoming administration, based on their plans, concepts, however you want to, whatever you call it, based on the research that we've been able to pull, these are the things that they plan to implement over their time in office. In these areas of specialties. So when it comes to education, we anticipate that it's going to look way different than it has looked in the past based off of what their platform from their campaign. So they have pledged to dismantle the Department of Education and cut funding. And dismantle can look different we don't know specifically what that means. We can only assume what dismantle mean. So could be, and we know that there's going to be a deficit of funding, or funding will be taken away, moved around. We look to see more charter schools, but this is a concern because a lot of the federal funding will be probably taken away from areas that deal with critical race theory, or dealing with DEIB or minorities. Again, going back to even how we're counted when it comes to the census, one of the deficits is that we have not always been able to get a good count of minority communities. And being that money will be taken away from funding and education in these same communities, it's become extremely concerning. In addition, another area that's been a very buzzword, big topic when it comes to education is that there will be a bar or a ban when it comes to transgender athletes participating in different school sports. And that is extremely concerning as well, from an education perspective and from a census count, of ensuring that they are being counted when it comes to resources for their community, when it comes to gender and that kind of thing. Next, when it comes to public health. So as we were researching this, we realized we were gathering numbers, and we were discussing that how 40 million people are currently actively receiving ACA. And we were doing research, and we were pulling different things, and we noticed that some of the rhetoric was a little confusing because they wanted to dismantle or repeal Obamacare, but keep the ACA or reformat it. So what we've decided to share is that what we do know is that the ACA will look different, because we both know that the Obamacare and ACA is the same thing. So it will either be repealed and replaced, and or dismantled and look different in a different capacity. But what we do recognize is that 40 million people will be affected in some way, in some capacity. It's our hope that it comes back after it's repealed and replaced, that hopefully it's brought back in a stronger way. So we can only be hopeful, but we do know that when it comes to public health, that this is an area that they will specifically be addressing, which will be the Affordable Care Act. So infrastructure, there are several different things this upcoming administration has talked about making adjustments to, but the things that we want to stick with is law enforcement and immigration. So the infrastructure, anticipated change, the anticipated when it comes to law enforcement will lower the cost of housing. And for whatever reason, they're connecting those two together. So we've also heard all of the talk of the biggest deportation act, and the day that's going to be something that's directly addressed with this upcoming administration, which is extremely concerning when it comes to law enforcement and what that will look like in the treatment of people. But we do anticipate that there will be something implemented in a very big way that will be very, it will have a very big effect on every, on things. Experts are showing that the increased enforcement on immigration laws actually will reduce the construct workforce and lead to higher prices. In addition to us being concerned about with the large deportation, when it comes to the census in 2020 and 2030, there will most likely or could be a different administration and things will be changed. However, when it comes to getting the count of the numbers of those who could still be here or may have left when it comes to resources, that number will not be as accurate as anticipated or needed so that we can plan for the next 10 years to come. Lastly, when it comes to housing, this is another area of concern. We know it's going to look different because it's been a vow to open a vast area of federal land for large scale housing construction, as well as suggesting proof for citizens requirements and mortgage bans. In addition, we were doing some research and we also recognize that our homeless population will probably be even more affected with the recent judgment from the Supreme Court about now being able to arrest those who may live in tents and that kind of thing publicly. So from a not bipartisan perspective, we are concerned about some of the things that will be applying in this upcoming administration because it's going to affect the numbers of the people that we are trying to capture the most to ensure that we have correct numbers to plan for 2030 and 2030 and beyond. So I'm going to pause because I see Mr. Charles wants to add some stuff and then also start taking questions. This presentation is, again, we wanted to talk about how to make it count. So we want to talk about what we anticipate happening and then start having soft conversations about how we can, knowing what we can anticipate, how can we make the knowledge that we have, what we've seen in the past, and how we can come together to collaborate to make these moments count, to make the biggest impact to be effective and efficient in our community. So I'm going to pause and pass it off to Mr. Charles and then Dom, and then we'll open up the floor. Mr. Charles, you don't have anything to add? Okay, Dom?
Nothing for him to add, but just wanted to allow him to share a little more before we open up the floor. Just some tools and opportunities I know are on the horizon for us that I think Mr. Charles could speak to pretty well. Mr. Charles, you ready?
Yes, sir. Sit on this slide for a second, and I just want you to know that the census just doesn't rise up every 10 years and say, hey, we're going to do a census, let's send out some forms. So what it has to do, and it actually starts planning the next census right after the one is completed. And we have been involved as South Carolina Counts with all of the, I'll call them NGOs, that have interest in the census. They have been working for the last 10 years. And earlier, Kara mentioned MENA, and MENA stands for Middle Eastern Northern Africa. That is a subset of our population. And what they have been able to do over the last couple of years is to get MENA designated as race. So normally I think we have about 6 races on the census. We will now have an additional one. And when I originally looked at it, just to talk about that for a second, I thought when I saw Middle Eastern Northern Africa, I thought that mainly those were people who would designate themselves as being Black or African American on the census. Well, in actuality, they identify themselves as white. So we have approximately 10 million people in that subset. And so now when the 2030 census comes up, they're going to have a box to check, not white, but MENA. So what that actually means in terms of some initial interpretation is that that's going to take about 10 million people from those who previously designated as white on the census, who now will have their own racial category, and then subsets of ethnicity under that. So they've been working on this for the last 2 years, and they finally got it approved. So the census works years to prepare for the next one. And I wanted to show this slide here because one of the things they do preceding a census is they said the Census Bureau, which by the way is a part of the Department of Commerce, they would do test sites. And this coming cycle in 2026, Spartanburg in the state of South Carolina will be a test site. And what they do in this scenario is that they try to test out technologies and innovation and data gathering, okay? And they look at hard to reach areas that they had undercounts in the previous census. Well, if you look at Spartanburg, you will see that what they really want to know about is how to get to people in living quarters, in hard to reach places that they've had initially areas of low response. And so when they do the test here in Spartanburg County, and that includes the city of Spartanburg, and I'm looking at you, Evelyn, on the list, we will have a role to play in that. And they're going to look, and I think one of the reasons that they chose Spartanburg is that Spartanburg has hard to reach communities. We have a lot of new development and multi-unit dwellings, and we have about 6 or 7 colleges in Spartanburg. So how are we gathering and sending information out to that? And they're going to test out some new innovations in that. And so we'll begin reaching out to the Census Bureau. I tried before the election. They said, well, wait till after the election. We don't have capacity to talk to anybody right now. So we will get involved in that as your grassroots organization as to what does that mean for South Carolina and in particular for the city of Spartanburg. But we will be a test site, one of 6 around the country. Next slide. Other direction.
Oh, uh-oh.
You're going to. Okay. So I thought it was worthwhile to have in this group to talk about what is happening in South Carolina. As everybody knows, South Carolina between 2010 and 2020 grew about 500,000 people. Okay, and so we also found out in that process when we looked at the data that South Carolina basically has 3 pockets of population growth. One is in the upstate, in the Greenville-Spartanburg area, and that's primarily being driven by the automotive and the health industry. And so we're seeing population growth here. For instance, I live in Spartanburg County along with Evelyn Blakely, and we're seeing data that shows our county is growing by about 10,000 people a year. Okay, that is the greatest growth that we have ever had in the Spartanburg County area. And the other pocket of growth that we see is the York area, Rock Hill area. And they're seeing a lot of growth and will continue to see a lot of growth because they're a bedroom community for Charlotte. If you don't want to live in North Carolina, can't afford the housing and whatever in North Carolina, just go right across the border to Rock Hill, and you have about a 45-minute to an hour commute into Charlotte. So that's happening. The other area of growth is the coastal community. And that's seeing some interesting growth there because those are people who lived in cold states like Illinois, New York, and some of the other places where they are retiring the baby boomers. And that group used to be as large as 78 million people in terms of baby boomers, but we're now down to around 68, 70 million. But they are moving. When they retire, they're selling their homes, they're taking the equity, they're taking their savings, and they are moving to warmer states. And one of those states is South Carolina, and they're moving along the coast. So what does that look like? We're seeing, and that's the in-migration that I was just talking about within the country. They're retiring, they're moving, they're going to places where life is sunnier, where they can go play golf, or for younger people, where are jobs? And in the automotive and health industry, that's in the upstate. The cost of living in South Carolina is lower. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anybody, but it's lower. Taxes are lower. I tell people all the time that when I moved here about 10 years ago back home to Spartanburg, my taxes when I moved here were 3 times lower than what I was paying in Maryland, just as an example. The job growth that I mentioned. White population is moving to South Carolina. And I talk a lot about this when I talk to groups. And people always talk about, well, the demographics are changing in Atlanta and in other places in North Carolina. Black people are moving to those states. For whatever the reason, they are flying over South Carolina and they're going to Georgia and North Carolina. And it's the white population that's basically coming to South Carolina. And people come here because of, as we like to, as they call it, the natural beauty. We can go to the mountains, to the beach, okay? And all that's available. And our urban areas are becoming more sophisticated and more urbane. Places like Greenville, Rock Hill, Charleston, and to some extent, even Columbia. They're coming to those areas. So we're going to continue to see those changes. And by the way, since the 2020 census, South Carolina as a whole is growing about 100,000 people per year. 100,000 people per year. So if that trend continues, we will double the growth in South Carolina that we saw between 2010 and 2020. We're going to double that. So we could potentially grow by another million people by the 2030 census. And what are some of the implications of that? Roads, housing, medical care, schools, and all those things. And we have to make sure that we collect that data. And by the way, the first thing that comes after the census is taken and is mandated in Section 1, Article 1, Section 2, is apportionment. Now, what happens in South Carolina if we grow by another million people? And the other states continue to see a depletion from the coast states due to baby boomers moving out. The first thing that comes up is representation in Congress. So it is possible that after 2030, that South Carolina could potentially get an additional congressional seat in Congress. So now you wonder why we talk about redistricting and why those cases are important. Because if we continue to have redistricting the way that we do, then how is that going to impact when we have another congressional district? What does that mean for representation in our state legislature? What does it mean for representation on our county councils and city councils in those areas where new people are moving in? And we've been talking about to a lot of people that when you have coming up next year in terms of elections, and next year there will basically be municipal elections in South Carolina. We won't have the state legislature. We won't have the congressional. That'll be in 2026 in the midterms. So what now happens in those communities where we have seen tremendous housing growth in underserved communities? Those communities now will have I'll use the term, a different complexion, different voting outcomes, okay? So we have to pay attention to that. And where we locate housing in our community, where jobs are growing. And is that shared prosperity within our communities? So all this goes back to, people, the census. It is the basis of everything that happens in our country, and it's been that way since 1790. I'll end there. Don?
Awesome. Well, before I let you off the hook, Mr. Charles, just want to say we got some useful websites listed here, and we can make that available in another fashion if necessary. But feel free to screenshot this or take a picture. Mr. Charles, as we already said, and as he already demonstrated in a lot of ways, has a wealth of knowledge and uses a lot of reputable sites to get some of his information. So just wanted to ask Mr. Charles if there was anything you want to say about your list or insights you want to give and how you might use that list that we have.
Well, first of all, the first one you see there is census.gov. That is the landing page for the census and a wealth and plethora of information, including the American Community Survey. What we are trying to say is go to these sites. I'm assuming people here have an interest either through their governmental agencies or their nonprofits. If you go here, you can go to census.gov and you can see the drill downs down to the census tract of your constituencies. The Civil Rights Organization is the civil rights group that is leading the charge on this. That is a leadership conference. And some of you may know Maya Wiley. She's a frequent talking head on the television news shows. They're one of the leading organizations nationally that's trying to make sure that the census for 2030 is a fair, equitable census and that we count everybody, because it's essential that we count everybody. The Census Black Roundtable is the organization from the National Urban League. They're taking a position to make sure that Black folks are fully counted in the upcoming census, and they worked on it in 2020. But we had a lot of undercounts in Black communities. The PRB is the Population Research Bureau. It is an organization, not governmental, but if you want to look into data that can boil down to where the trends are happening around the country, take a look at that. The Census Project is exactly what it says. It is taking a look at the overall, what is the census doing, what is the advocacy around it, and that sort of thing. And then the RFA, which is the Revenue Financial Administration, which is the organization that spearheads redistricting in our state. They're the governmental agency outside of the legislature that handles redistricting, and they have a lot of data on the state of South Carolina and its population, the trends, and that sort of thing. And they are basically a subset of the Census Bureau for the state of South Carolina. So we have a lot of ways to get information. We have a lot of ways to delve into the data, and data is going to drive everything in terms of impact and allocation. And I'll just add this as I wrap up. This past year, in 2023, it was estimated that the federal government would allocate in discretionary funding based off of census data $2.8 trillion. So if in the state of South Carolina we have an undercount, and Don mentioned it was about 1%, that's 50,000 people, you might say, oh, that's not a whole lot. But look at where the undercount was. It was in 0 to 9-year-olds. So if we had an undercount in that age bracket alone, in that category alone, that means we didn't get early childhood education funds. We didn't do a whole lot in looking at pediatric care and the funds that support that from the federal government. And the other thing that was an undercount were Black and brown people. So where are they? Are we sure we have, when it comes to redistricting, and redistricting includes matters like minority communities, and making sure that we understand the populations within the districts that we are creating. So all of that matters. And these webs and these links, you can go there and you can poke around, you look up, and you've been there for like 2 hours and you didn't know it because of the data and information that's housed in these, and just these. And I'll stop there, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. So on that note, we always like to come away with some actionable steps. You might be going, what do we do with this information? We're going to facilitate a little bit of dialogue here in the last 15 minutes that we have. Actually, Evelyn, I see you in the chat. And so be on standby because we're going to come to that, maybe give some responses. But before we get into that discussion, just want to give you some actionable steps. You're like, all this information is great. What do I do? Well, one thing for sure is you can follow us on social media or join our listserv so that you can stay abreast of this information as we continue to monitor the implications of the administration coming in, as well as just other things that you might need to know as we get closer and closer to that 2030 census. Or if you're past that level and you're going, hey, listen, this is great. I want more people to know about it. How might we be able to partner? Is it coming to facilitate a workshop? Is it doing a web luncheon like we're having here? just let us know the ways that you might want to partner. So those are two steps for you. And last, this one a little more about y'all and a little less about us. If you would be so kind as to email us your first and last name, your mailing address, and phone number before the call of business this week. So you got a little over 24 hours. If you send us that information, you'll receive a lunch gift card. There's a typo there. Lunch gift card from SC Counts and a few recommended books for free. And so on that note, you might go, where do we email? There's a picture of our state director, Kara, with the SC Counts email. So please, first, last name, address, and phone, and you get lunch on us and a few recommended books. And on that note, we want to open up for discussion. And actually, the first question up, Evelyn asked, Spartanburg officials do a homeless count every January. Does any of that info go into census data?
And I'll take the first shot at that. Evelyn, I am not aware that it feeds into census data, okay? I am aware that it may feed up to HUD. There's aspects of it that may feed up to HHS or the appropriate agency that focuses on homelessness, but it does not, to my knowledge, feed into census data. And in fact, they take a little of the census data and they use that as part of their survey to balance out what I think they're doing. And I do think that it probably feeds to the state because the state does receive block grants. And at a state level, they have to figure out where to spend the money in those block grants. So I'm aware, Evelyn, but I am going to look into more of that question. Where does that data actually go beyond Spartanburg County, beyond the state of South Carolina? But I do know that they're probably feeding it up to those other federal agencies that they have to report to, but it doesn't necessarily go into the census data. Because the census is a snapshot in time. When we finish that census in the month of April every 10 years, that's a moment in time. And so the only thing that's reoccurring after that is the American Community Survey. And that's where the updates into that go. But I think that you and I need to say to our county officials, and I would say to everybody else, because I'm pretty sure that every county does something like this. When you gather that data, what do you do with it? And the other part is, are you using it to help make smarter decisions around homelessness, or are you just using it as a data point that sits in a bucket that does nothing? And I think those are legitimate questions for our local government officials who are gathering this information.
All right, thank you, Mr. Charles. Is there anyone else with any questions or comments? Is there another?
While we are waiting on that, Kara, I just want to say that, and I just want to hit this point again in terms of what we are trying to do. The census, that little known thing that happens every 10 years, is really the basis for our democracy. It is how we get information to make more informed decisions about our country, about our states, about our municipalities and our communities. If we don't fully participate in that and get people to understand that the government is not just trying to get in your business, okay? It is trying to see, do we have enough information to make decisions? And as we used to say when I was growing up, garbage in, garbage out. If we don't get good information into the data aspect of how we make decisions, we're not going to make good decisions. We're going to make decisions regardless. And by the way, we had an undercount in South Carolina of about 1%, which is about 50,000 people. The state of Texas is saying they had an undercount of 500,000 people. Now think about it. 500,000 people undercount. And how do you, now those people are using resources in that community. So they don't get federal allocations to support another 500,000. And by the way, most of those people were brown people because they went into the shadows. And by the way, if we continue the current policies that we have, how many people are going to go in the shadows this time? Because we already have legislation in the Congress already submitted for a census in 2030 to only count citizens. So we're going to be making bad decisions off of bad data. And that's why we're saying that we have to get everybody involved in this and understand that this is really important. It is not just this ancillary thing that happens by federal government trying to get in your business. And I'm sure the people here understand that, but we have to get that out to all the other people as well over the next several years.
All right, so are there any other questions, comments? All right, well, if not, thank you all for joining us. We want to be respectful of your time and keep this within the hour. As we have shared, we would like you to please email us your contact information so that we can send you a little small token of appreciation and also make it a full lunch and learn. As well as please, I got you, Ms. Mary. Please get our contact information. We'd like to do presentations to your community, to your circle. And if you need research or if you have questions around the census, redistricting, civic engagement, please reach out to us. As you can tell, Mr. Charles is our context expert, and what he does not know, he will find out. Dom and I, we look for a good presentation, and we would enjoy getting to know you and your circle and sharing with you all, excuse me, the work that we're doing, what we anticipate, and how you all can get involved. And there was a question that jumped in our chat from Mary P that says, anything we can do about the gerrymandering aspect of all of this? We're doing it now, and that's having these conversations. And Mr. Charles, you can probably give a little bit more direct answer, but we are shedding light on a lot of this stuff because the average person doesn't know what gerrymandering is. Or redistricting, or don't really have a full capacity and understanding of it. So that's what we're doing now by creating these spaces and platforms in which we can educate and inform legally. Mr. Charles, if you want to give a better answer other than we're doing the work now of just educating people and challenging and asking the questions so that we can avoid some of these challenges.
Mary, that is a very good question, by the way. What do we do about the aspects of gerrymandering? When the Supreme Court this year had its initial ruling that partisan gerrymandering is okay, that opened up a whole new door, I believe, from the standpoint of what is possible under gerrymandering. So we know that I believe, and I supported the case to overturn the congressional maps in South Carolina because they are gerrymandered. When the court said, oh, it's okay to use partisanship because you guys are in charge and you're going to rule things. But we know that in states like South Carolina, you don't get the partisan gerrymandering unless you engage in racial gerrymandering. That is very clear. But Samuel Alito said in his opinion that he wrote regarding the Supreme Court case, he said that the people of South Carolina should give the legislature of South Carolina the benefit of the doubt. Okay? Now, if you look like me and you look at your history of the state of South Carolina going back to 1895, where South Carolina called the Constitutional Convention to disenfranchise black voters and black citizens during Reconstruction. And by the way, they were able to achieve that. I am less likely to give our legislature the benefit of the doubt to achieve partisan gerrymandering, which includes racial gerrymandering. So that's why the ACLU, in its case, filing to the South Carolina Supreme Court, filed its case. And they filed that case because they felt that the South Carolina Constitution had a more inclusive definition of how to engage in political representation. I feel that it's not going to go anywhere. Not going to go anywhere.
But we are doing what we can do and what we have the
Oh, yeah.
power to do of having these conversations and creating platforms
Oh, yeah.
and spaces
Yeah.
to educate so we know how to move forward. And again, we'd love to continue having these conversations. You bring us to your spaces so that we can. But as Mr. Charles said, and ultimately, what do we do? Support organizations like the ACLU, support organizations like ours as we're bringing things to light, to ask the hard questions, to see how we can make an impact on all of these subjects that we find challenging, and we know we have to be the voice and to make these things efficient and effective and impactful in our community.
Mm. And if I might add one last thing on that note, Tara,
Yes, sir.
Gilda Hobb has, for the last several sessions of the state legislature, introduced a bill to create a redistricting commission in the state of South Carolina. And each year it is just set and die. We are talking with the ACLU because they see that, and we want to look at that as one of the things that we begin to push and get behind in our state legislature, because before it was just Gilda Hobbs fighting a lonely battle. And I think that one of the things that we can do, Mary, is get behind the creation of a nonpartisan redistricting commission, which will hopefully lessen the possibility that we will have future gerrymandered maps. It is not a guarantee.
Thank you for adding that. Dom notated in the comment section, just in case you did not see, is that we do give different types of presentations. So though we do presentations in this capacity to where we play our cartoon and we give a formal presentation, we do have interactive activities that explains the
Uh-oh.
We lost Kara.
Kara.
So
I
while
don't
Kara's
know.
away, let me add one more thing before we sign off, Don. The
Mhm.
next thing that you're going to see happening, in addition to the test sites, is you're going to hear something called LUCA in your local communities. And LUCA basically stands for the Local Update of Community Addresses. This is the basis of how the census will send out forms in 2030. The first thing you're going to see in your communities, and I would say get involved into it, is the local jurisdiction, city government, county government, beginning to update those local addresses. And we have to be involved in that, because we have to make sure that that the Census Bureau know that we have people living in our communities. And if they don't, it's going to be another hard to reach, underserved group within the census count in 2030.
Awesome. Really quickly, thank you so much for that, Mr. Charles. Thank you everyone for joining. We're right at 1 o'clock. Mary, you asked about Charleston County. We traveled to Charleston. Kara and I both were actually just in Charleston for a tabling event about 2-3 weeks ago. Our team is willing to come anywhere in the state. Let's just have a conversation about it. You can use that same email and reach out. We'd love to come live and in person. Thank y'all so much for your time and your attention today. If there are any ways that you want to continue conversation or engage more, please let us know. Y'all have a good one.